Riverrun received them like a held breath finally released. The castle's red sandstone walls looked warm from afar, but the gates admitted winter just as readily as men. Snow gathered in the seams of stone and on the shoulders of the guards, melting into dark rivulets that made each man look as though he had been sweating fear. Robb Stark had chosen Riverrun for the telling, not the twins. Let the Freys choke on their own ruin behind him. Riverrun was Tully ground, old loyalty ground, and the Riverlands listened differently here. Even those who doubted him could not pretend that Brynden Tully's home was a nest of Stark treachery. The great hall filled until the air grew thick with wet wool, smoke, and the sour edge of rumor. The Riverlords arrived cautious, eyes flitting to one another to measure who had come and who had not. Northmen stood with them, grim and stiff-backed, as if they feared the walls might betray them. Robb watched every face and felt the same cold lesson the twins had carved into him. A man's eyes revealed more than his words. He did not begin with wrath. He began with proof. A long table sat beneath the banners, and on that table lay the fragments of a plan that would have ended the North in a single song. Crossbows taken from behind tapestries, bolts wrapped in oiled cloth and hidden under the musician's platform, iron bars meant to slam doors shut, harp frames split open to show hollow compartments, and letters, Tywin Lannister's lion pressed into wax, Walder Frey's cramped hand, Roose Bolton's neat script that read like a butcher's list. Robb lifted one letter and held it high. "This," he said, his voice carrying into the rafters, "is why my men live." A murmur rippled through the crowd, low as a river under ice. Jason Mallister's jaw tightened when he saw the lion seal. Tydo's Blackwood's eyes narrowed, as if he were reading omens in the parchment fibers. Robb spoke plainly then, the way his father had spoken when justice was carried out beneath Winterfell's sky. "They meant to kill us in the Twins' Hall," Robb Stark said. "They meant to do it under guest right so the world would call it fate and not murder. They meant to bar the doors and shoot my bannermen as they ate. They meant to cut down my uncle Edmure Tully at his wedding feast. They meant to sell the North and Riverlands for gold." He did not beg forgiveness for living. He did not apologize for moving first. He simply laid out the trap and showed how it had been sprung in reverse. "And yes," Robb Stark said, and his voice went colder, "blood was spilled under Walder Frey's roof, but I did not take his bread. I did not take his salt. I refused the binding, because the binding was a noose." Some men shifted at that. The notion of refusing bread and salt felt like sacrilege to them, as if a king could not refuse hospitality without inviting divine judgment. Robb saw the uncertainty, and he understood it too well. Men clung to rules when the world turned cruel. Rules were the last thin wall between them and chaos. A Bracken lord stepped forward, face pinched. "A convenient detail," he said sharply. "If we accept that any man may refuse bread, then claim himself unbound, then what is guest right worth?" "Guest right is worth the honor of the host," Brynden Tully said, voice like a drawn blade. "And Walder Frey's honor was already sold. Do you miss the point on purpose? Or are you truly that thick?" The Bracken lord flushed, but he did not retreat. "If Robb Stark can kill his host in a hall," he said, "then what stops him from killing any of us when we become inconvenient?" Robb's gaze fixed on him, steady as frost. "What stops me," Robb Stark said, "is that I am not you. I do not kill for convenience. I kill when men come for my life and the lives of my people." The hall quieted at that because it was not a threat. It was a line in stone. Catelyn Stark watched from the high table, fingers interlaced so tightly she could feel her pulse in each knuckle. She saw men weigh the truth against fear, weigh the proof against the comfort of old customs, and she understood how easily a realm could be turned with whispers alone. Tywin Lannister did not need to win battles if he could win the story. Robb spoke again. "I will not punish Frey women and children for the sins of Walder Frey and his conspirators," he said. "I will not slaughter a house to cleanse my anger, but I will bind the twins, and I will hold it with trout and wolves until the Riverlands are safe from lions and snakes." A ripple of approval came from some. Blackwoods, Mallisters, men who hated Frey arrogance and Lannister cruelty alike. Others remained wary, and Robb did not blame them. He had become the kind of king men feared could do terrible things because terrible things had been done to him. He lowered the letter and let it fall onto the table with a soft slap, as if sealing the argument. "Now," Robb Stark said, "if any man here believes I should have died politely to preserve a custom my enemies were already breaking, speak. If not, swear again. Swear to the Riverlands. Swear to the north. Swear to the dead who would be here if I had waited for the second note of that song." One by one, men moved. Not all at once, not with perfect unity, but enough. Enough to form a wall of oath around him, however cracked. Jason Mallister stepped forward first, eyes hard. "I swear," he said, and the words sounded like a grudging gift. "For the Riverlands." Tytos Blackwood followed, slower, his voice softer but no less firm. "I swear," he said, "for honor, if any remains in this war." Others followed. Not all. Some held back, and Robb marked their faces, storing them like names on a list he wished he did not need to keep. When the swearing ended, the hall's air felt different. Still cold, still wary, but steadied by something like purpose. Catelyn Stark watched her son and realized he was learning to rule not with the warmth of loyalty, but wit. The hard math of fear, proof, and necessity. It would keep him alive. It would also carve him hollow if he let it. When the hall emptied, the true war returned to the table. Riverrun Solar was a narrow room with thick walls and a hearth that could not quite chase the winter from the corners. The fire popped and hissed, throwing orange light over maps, wax seals, and the bruised faces of men who had learned that victory only changed the shape of fear. Robb Stark bent over the map, finger tracing roads that became rivers of mud in winter. Brynden Tully stood opposite him, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man who had spent a lifetime refusing to sit while danger was near. Catelyn Stark remained close, unwilling to be sent away to prayer and waiting rooms as if mothers were ornaments. The great John Umber loomed near the door, restless as a caged bear. Wendell Manderly sat heavily on a chair that creaked under him, his eyes darting between the map and Robb as if the parchment might bite. "We cannot hold everything," Brynden Tully said at last. "Not with the men we have, not with winter coming like this." Robb Stark's finger paused on the twins. "We hold the crossing," he said. "We must." Brynden Tully nodded. "Aye, we hold it, but you cannot sit on it like a hen on an egg while the north burns. Nor can you abandon the Riverlands entirely without inviting Tywin Lannister to cut it to ribbons." Robb Stark's jaw tightened. He hated the truth because it offered no clean path. "Then you hold the Riverlands," Robb Stark said. "You hold Riverrun. You hold the twins through Tully men in the gatehouses and Stark steel on the bridge." "And you?" Catelyn Stark asked, though she already knew, because her son's gaze kept drifting north, always north, as if his bones were pulled by the cold. Robb Stark looked at her. The boy in him flickered, the part that wanted to promise safety, to say he could be everywhere at once. The king crushed it. "I go north," Robb Stark said. "Before the roads vanish." Wendell Manderly's hands twitched. "Moat Cailin," he said, voice tight. "The Iron Men still hold it. They'll bleed us if we march straight through." "We don't march straight," Robb Stark said. He pointed to the neck, the smear of green where swamps swallowed armies. "We speak to Howland Reed," he said. "If any man knows a path around Ironborn eyes, it is he." Brynden Tully's brow creased. "A crannogmen lord," Brynden Tully muttered. "You trust reeds and bogs more than stone?" "I trust men who have not tried to sell me," Robb Stark replied, and the sharpness in his voice made the room still. Catelyn Stark felt the ache of it. He was learning to trust like a wounded animal. Only those who had proved their teeth were not meant for his throat. "What of Sansa Stark?" Catelyn Stark asked softly. The question landed like a stone dropped in a quiet pool. Robb's face tightened, the muscle in his cheek jumping once. "I will not forget," Robb Stark said, voice rough, "but I cannot trade the North for one life, even if it is my sister's. Tywin Lannister wants me to do that. He wants me to run in circles while he tightens the rope. Brynden Tully's gaze held Robb's. He will tighten it anyway. Robb Stark nodded once. Then I make my own rope, Robb Stark said. I take back the north. I cut out the Iron Men. I crush Ramsay Snow before he becomes more than a rumor. And when my home stands again, then I turn south. Then Tywin Lannister learns what it means to threaten a wolf's blood. The great Jon Umber grinned at that, savage approval flashing. He rumbled. Let us take the fight north. Let the Iron Men learn what wolves do to thieves. Catelyn Stark watched Robb and saw the fury beneath the control. Fury could drive a man through winter, could also drive him into traps. You will need more than fury, Catelyn Stark said quietly. You will need allies. Robb Stark's gaze flicked to Wyman Manderly. White Harbor, Robb Stark said. If I can reach it, I can move men by sea and avoid the next worst roads. Wyman Manderly will not betray me. He is too proud of his own honor. Wyman Manderly swallowed. My Lord Father will answer, he said. If he hears you live. Robb Stark's mouth tightened. Then we make sure he hears, he said, and gestured to a sheaf of letters. Ravens. Now, before Tywin Lannister's whispers arrive first. Grey Wind lifted his head near the hearth, eyes open and bright. The dire wolf watched Robb as if he understood every word, as if he too weighed the roads and the blood. Catelyn Stark felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the knowledge of what she could not stop. Robb Stark would go north. The war would follow him like a shadow. And the song that had failed to kill him in the Twins would be sung in other ways, in other places, until someone's throat finally caught the last note. The Twins did not accept new masters quietly. Perwyn Frey learned that on the second day, when the small folk gathered in the courtyard beneath the gatehouse, their faces pinched with hunger and grief, their mouths full of curses they had once swallowed in fear of Walder Frey. Now fear had new shapes, wolves and trout, and grief had no patience for politics. They screamed for Walder Frey, screamed for sons who would never return, screamed that Robb Stark had defiled their home. Some threw stones. One threw a loaf of bread that struck a Stark guard's helm and broke apart like brittle bone. Perwyn Frey stood at the center of it, pale as ash. He wore a cloak now with a small direwolf pin beside his own sigil, a mark that made him look like a man wearing another's skin. His hands trembled, though he tried to keep them still. Olyvar Frey stepped forward, voice raised. Listen, he shouted. They were going to kill him. They were going to kill all of us. They were going to save us. A woman shrieked back, eyes wild. They were going to save us from wolves. Olyvar Frey flinched as if struck. Perwyn Frey watched him and saw the truth. A man could betray his kin for honor and still be hated by those he tried to save. A Tully guard shoved through the crowd and approached Perwyn Frey, speaking low. Perwyn Frey's eyes widened, then narrowed, and he swallowed hard. They found him, Perwyn Frey murmured. In the shadow of the archway lay a body. A man in muddy red, a messenger with no banner. His throat had been opened with a clean cut. A coin purse lay spilled beside him, gold glinting bright against the gray stone. Lannister gold, the kind that could turn hungry men into daggers. Perwyn Frey's stomach churned. He knelt and picked up one coin, holding it between thumb and forefinger as if it were poison. On one side, the lion's face stared up, smug and shining. A Stark guard's voice was hard. He was headed for the kitchens, the guard said. We caught him near the stores. Had this on him. He jerked his chin at the coin purse. And a note. Perwyn Frey took the note with fingers that shook. It was short. Tywin Lannister did not waste ink on men meant to die. Open the gate at midnight. Fire in the west tower. Gold for your house. Perwyn Frey's breath came shallow. He wasn't Frey, he whispered. Doesn't matter, the Stark guard said. He was paid to make you look like it. He was paid to make it seem you cannot control your own castle. Olyvar Frey stared at the dead messenger and went very still. He came to buy us, Olyvar Frey whispered. Perwyn Frey's mouth tasted of bile. He will keep coming, Perwyn Frey said, and the truth sounded like a sentence. The crowd's shouting rose again, and a stone struck Perwyn Frey's shoulder. He flinched, pain sharp, shame sharper. Olyvar Frey lifted his voice again, hoarse. If you open those gates, he shouted to his kin and small folk alike, you invite lions into your beds. You invite burning. You invite slaughter that will not spare you just because you are Frey. A man in the crowd spat. We would rather die Frey than live Stark. Perwyn Frey's hands clenched around the note until the parchment crumpled. He felt the urge to scream, to run, to throw the coin back into the dead man's mouth. Instead, he forced himself to stand, spine straightening with something like stubborn survival. No one opens these gates, Perwyn Frey said, voice shaking but loud. Not for gold, not for revenge, not for your grief. If you try, you die. And if you bring lions here, you'll die anyway. The crowd quieted, not because they agreed, but because they heard the steel beneath his fear. They had lived under Walder Frey long enough to recognize a man who meant what he said, even if he hated himself for saying it. Snow drifted into the courtyard, soft and indifferent, settling on shoulders and hair and the dead messenger's open eyes. Perwyn Frey looked at the coin in his palm and understood, with cold clarity, the kind of war Tywin Lannister would wage now. Not banners and battles, small knives, small fires, small coins that could turn a keep into a grave from the inside. He crushed the coin in his fist until it bit his skin, and he whispered, half to himself and half to the dead man at his feet. It won't be that easy. Tywin Lannister's first blow did not come with swords. It came with a Septon. The man arrived under a flag of peace, thin and pale, his fingers heavy with rings that looked too fine for a traveling holy man. His escort wore Lannister crimson beneath travel cloaks, their eyes alert, hands never far from sword hilts. Riverrun's guards let them in only after Brynden Tully's inspection. No hidden blades, no poisoned wine. Yet the real weapon was not steel. It was a scroll. The Septon stood in Riverrun's courtyard beneath a gray sky that promised more snow and less mercy. Men gathered in a half-circle. Riverlords with their cloaks snapped by wind. Stark soldiers with wolf pins on their breasts. Servants peering from doorways with wide eyes. Catelyn Stark stood close to Robb Stark, feeling the castle stones beneath her feet and the old bitterness in her throat. The Septon's voice rose, practiced and clear. By the judgment of the most devout, he read, and under the sight of the seven, it is declared that Robb Stark, who names himself king, has committed sacrilege by spilling blood under a host's roof. Brynden Tully made a sound of disgust, and by doing so, has broken the sacred custom of guest right, calling down the Father's judgment upon himself and those who harbor him. A ripple passed through the crowd. Some men stiffened. Some looked away, uneasy. The faith's words mattered, even to men who seldom prayed. It gave their fear a shape and their doubt a blessing. Robb Stark did not move. His face remained calm, almost expressionless, but Catelyn Stark felt the tension in him like a drawn bowstring. The Septon continued, voice solemn. Let it be known that any lord who supports this oathbreaker and sacrilegious king stands in defiance of the seven, and that those who repent and return to the crown may be granted forgiveness. There it is, Brynden Tully muttered, low and venomous. Forgiveness for sale. Robb Stark lifted a hand, and Brynden Tully fell silent, though the fury remained in his eyes. When the Septon finished, he rolled the scroll with a flourish and lifted his chin as if he expected submission. Robb Stark stepped forward. Did your most devout read these? Robb Stark asked quietly. The Septon blinked. My lord, my king, Robb Stark corrected, and the courtyard seemed to tighten around the word. He gestured to a table that had been set beside the well. On it lay Tywin Lannister's letter, the crossbows, the broken harp, the iron bar. Read, Robb Stark said, and his voice carried with the same cold command he had used in the Twins' Hall. Read what Walder Frey and Roose Bolton agreed to do under guest right. Read what Tywin Lannister promised in exchange. The Septon hesitated. His escort shifted, uneasy.
Robb Stark's gaze sharpened.
"Read," he repeated, and now the word was not polite. Slowly, reluctantly, the Septon stepped to the table. He lifted Tywin Lannister's letter as if it might stain his fingers. His eyes moved over the words, and color drained from his face. Catelyn Stark watched him swallow, watched the moment doctrine met ink and found it ugly. The Septon's voice emerged thinner. This speaks of," he faltered. "Speak it," Robb Stark said, and there was no mercy in his tone. The Septon swallowed again. "This speaks," he said, voice trembling, "of murder under a roof, of offering lands and titles for the death of guests." Robb Stark nodded once. "So," Robb Stark said, "tell your most devout that guest right was broken first by the host who offered it as a mask. Tell them I refused bread and salt because I smelled the knife. Tell them I chose to live." The Septon's mouth opened, then closed. He looked suddenly less like a man of God and more like a man caught between lions and wolves. Brynden Tully stepped closer, eyes fierce. "And tell them," Brynden Tully added, "that if the faith wishes to condemn a man for not dying politely, then the faith has become another weapon of the crown." The Septon flinched. Robb Stark's voice stayed controlled. "Go back," he said. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them the truth. If they still call me cursed, then let the realm see what kind of curse it is. A king who does not lay his throat on a block to satisfy a pretty custom." The Septon bowed stiffly, no longer triumphant, and backed away. The Lannister escort moved with him, their faces tight. As they left the courtyard, snow began to fall again. Soft at first, then thicker, the sky shedding white like a slow surrender. Catelyn Stark watched the departing Septon and felt a bitter certainty settle in her bones. The faith would not choose truth over power, not if truth threatened the crown's grip. And Tywin Lannister would keep sending words like arrows until the realm bled from doubt. Robb Stark stood in the snow, unmoving, and said softly, to no one and everyone, "Then we stop listening."
Sansa Stark knees hurt.
The stones of the Great September were cold even through cloth, and the air smelled of incense and wax and the sweat of too many bodies pressed together to watch a girl pray for a brother's soul. She kept her hands folded because if she unclenched them, she feared she might claw at something. At the altar, at the Septon's robes, at her own throat, the chanting rolled over her like water over a drowning person. The Septons spoke of guest right and the Father's judgment, of broken vows and the curse of blood spilled under a roof. Their voices rose and fell with practiced sorrow, as if sorrow could be rehearsed. Behind her, Cersei Lannister stood in green and gold, her presence a weight more oppressive than the Sept stone. Sansa could feel the Queen's gaze on the back of her neck like a hand. Tywin Lannister watched from the shadow of a column, still as carved rock. He did not look at Sansa with cruelty, not openly. His eyes were the eyes of a man watching a lever he meant to pull. A Septon lifted a parchment high before the crowd. Words were read aloud. Oathbreaker, sacrilege, cursed. The small folk murmured, their fear turning into a kind of eager judgment. It was easier to hate a distant wolf king than to hate the lions who ruled the city and starved them when it suited. Sansa kept her face lowered. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her beg. Cersei's voice drifted close, soft as silk, sharp as a needle. "Pray louder," Cersei Lannister whispered. "They should hear your devotion." Sansa's throat tightened. "I am praying," she murmured, because defiance here only led to pain. Cersei's nails grazed her shoulder through cloth, light and threatening. "Pray that your brother repents," Cersei said. "Pray that he kneels. Pray that he sends his crown to the Iron Throne and his mother's head besides." Sansa's hands trembled. She tasted blood where she bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself not to cry out. From the shadows, Tywin Lannister spoke, his voice low but carrying in the hush between chants. "The realm values peace," Tywin Lannister said. "Peace requires rules. When rules are broken, the realm must respond." The Septon bowed his head, as if Tywin's words were scripture. Sansa stared at the altar and thought of Winterfell's gods wood, of snow on branches, of silence that did not demand performance. She wondered if her brother even knew what was being said about him in this city, if he knew that the faith, bought and bent, was being used to make his survival look like sin. She wondered if he cared. She wondered if he could afford to care. The chanting resumed, louder, drowning thought. In the crowd, someone shouted, "Curse him!" Another voice followed, "Curse the wolf!" The words spread like a fire catching dry thatch, turning prayer into spectacle. Sansa's breathing grew shallow. She clenched her hands harder, nails digging into her palms until pain anchored her. Tywin Lannister's gaze remained on her, steady, measuring. He did not need to strike her to hurt Robb Stark. He only needed her visible, kneeling, framed by faith and accusation, a symbol that could be pointed at like a wound. Cersei leaned down, lips close to Sansa's ear. "Send him a message," she whispered. "Tell him what he has become in the eyes of the Seven. Tell him the realm will never accept him. Tell him to come south and beg." Sansa's eyes stung. She swallowed. "He won't," she whispered, not because she was sure, but because she needed to believe her brother still had teeth. Cersei's smile was audible. "Then you will kneel longer," she said. Tywin Lannister turned away from the altar with the slow certainty of a man who believed time itself served him. Outside the Sept, King's Landing's bells rang thinly in the winter air. Sansa remained kneeling, a small figure in a vast holy place, and she whispered to the gods she did not fully trust anymore, "Robb, don't come." The Lannisters came at them in pieces, not an army marching with drums and banners, but riders in small packs, men-at-arms moving like wolves of their own, striking at supply wagons, burning storehouses, killing messengers on roads. Tywin Lannister understood what winter did to an army. It slowed it, starved it, made it brittle. So he did not try to break Robb Stark with one blow. He tried to make Robb's war collapse from hunger and doubt. Dacey Mormont caught one pack near the Trident, where the river road narrowed and trees pressed close like a crowd leaning in to watch a fight. Snow whipped through branches, stinging faces, muffling hoofbeats until violence arrived like a sudden thought. Dacey rode at the front, her spear held low. Her men were hard-eyed, quiet, the kind who had learned to breathe through fear. They had left Riverrun at dawn on Robb Stark's orders, moving fast, riding light. They found the Lannister pack when smoke rose from a small village, a black smear against white fields. The village was already burning when they reached it. Roof beams crackled. A child's scream carried thinly, then cut off. Lannister riders moved among the huts, dragging sacks of grain, laughing as they kicked over a cart. Dacey's jaw tightened. She did not shout a warning. She did not give them time to mount and form. She drove her horse forward and let the first Lannister see her only when her spear was already in his chest. The man's eyes widened in surprise, then went dull. He fell, dragging the spear with him until Dacey wrenched it free with a grunt. Blood steamed on the snow. The fight exploded. Northmen surged from the treeline, axes and swords flashing. A Lannister rider swung his blade toward Dacey's head. She ducked and drove her spear up under his arm, feeling it punch through mail and flesh. He screamed as he slid from the saddle, legs twitching. Horses reared, terrified by the smell of blood and fire. Men slipped in mud beneath the snow crust. Steel rang, sharp as ice breaking. A Lannister sergeant tried to rally his men, shouting that they were lions, that wolves were only beasts. A Mormont axe took him in the throat, and his words became a wet gurgle. Dacey saw a boy, no more than 14, standing in a doorway, face smeared with soot, eyes huge. A Lannister man grabbed the boy by the hair, laughing as he raised his dagger. Dacey's spear flew from her hands like anger made solid. It struck the Lannister in the side of the neck. The man jerked, choking, and dropped the boy. Dacey barreled forward, snatched the boy by the collar, and shoved him behind her horse. "Run," she snapped. The boy hesitated, then ran, slipping in snow, vanishing into smoke. A raven fluttered up from a bloodied branch as if startled by the violence, wings beating hard. It circled once, then vanished into the gray sky, another witness no one could silence. Within minutes, it was over. The Lannister pack lay broken, bodies sprawled among burning huts and spilled grain. Two Northmen knelt, breathing hard, faces pale with fury and exhaustion. One wiped tears from his cheeks with a bloody glove and stared at the village's smoke as if he could will the dead back. Dacey stood in the snow, spear reclaimed, chest heaving. She looked at the bodies and felt no triumph, only the bitter understanding that this was what the war would be now. Small slaughters scattered across frozen roads, each one meant to weaken the whole. A rider approached, panting. "Lady Dacey Mormont," he said, voice hoarse. "A message from Riverrun." Dacey took the parchment with stiff fingers. She read quickly, eyes narrowing. Robb Stark was leaving. The king was going north. Dacey looked toward the smoke rising into the winter sky and thought of the north under iron-born axes, of Ramsay Snow's smile, of Tywin Lannister's whispers. She tightened her grip on her spear until her knuckles went white. "Then we ride," she said. The neck welcomed them with cold water and silence. Roads became suggestions here, lines that vanished under swamp and reed. Trees rose black and skeletal, their branches reaching like hands that had forgotten prayer. Mist clung low, wrapping the world in gray, so that men's faces looked like ghosts beneath their helms. Robb Stark rode at the front, cloak dark with damp. Catelyn Stark rode near him despite his protests, because she had refused to remain behind and wait for ravens that might never come. If she was to lose another son, she would not lose him in absence. Gray wind moved ahead of the column, silent as smoke, stepping over pools that would have swallowed a horse. The direwolf's instincts were better than any crannogmen's map. Where gray wind chose, the ground held. And then, out of the reeds, men emerged like part of the swamp given shape. Crannogmen, small compared to Northmen, but sharp-eyed, their cloaks mottled and damp as frog skin. They carried spears with barbed points and wore knives at their belts like farmers wore tools. Their faces were painted in streaks of mud. At their center stood Howland Reed. He was slighter than Catelyn remembered from youth, but his eyes were the same, dark, steady, like deep water that hid its currents. Beside him stood a young woman with fierce eyes and a spear balanced easily in her hand, and a boy with green dreams in his gaze, his face pale under his hood. "Howland Reed," Robb Stark said, drawing his horse to a halt. Howland Reed bowed his head, not deeply, but enough to honor the king without bending his neck like a servant. "Robb Stark," Howland Reed said, "you have winter on your shoulders." "And war," Robb Stark replied. "Howland Reed," Catelyn Stark said, and the name tasted of memory, of a small man at Winterfell long ago, quiet, loyal, one of the few who had returned from the Tower of Joy. Howland Reed's gaze met hers, and something softened briefly. "Lady Catelyn Stark," he said, "you should not be in the swamps." "Neither should my son," Catelyn Stark replied, and heard the steel in her own voice. Howland Reed's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Then we will make the swamps serve him," he said. Robb Stark leaned forward slightly. "Moat Cailin," Robb Stark said. "The Ironborn hold it. I need it opened." Howland Reed nodded, as if Robb had asked for a door in his own hall. "Moat Cailin is 3 towers and a curse," Howland Reed said. "An army cannot take it from the south without becoming a pile of corpses." "Then we don't take it like an army," Robb Stark said. Howland Reed's gaze shifted to Grey Wind, who stood on a patch of firmer ground, head lifted, listening. "No," Howland Reed agreed. "We take it like the neck takes all things, quietly." Mira Reed stepped forward, spear in hand. "There are paths," she said, voice brisk. "Not roads, paths. The Iron Men don't know them. They don't look down. They only look out." Jojen Reed's eyes were distant. "The towers will fall," he murmured, "but not the way you think."
Catelyn Stark's skin prickled.
There was something unsettling about the boy's tone. as if he spoke from a place beyond the swamp and beyond time. Robb Stark did not ask questions he could not afford to answer. "Show me," he said. Howland Reed gestured, and the crannogmen melted back into the reeds, leading the way. Robb signaled, and his column followed, boots squelching, horses snorting nervously, men muttering prayers to gods who did not listen to swamp water. Catelyn Stark rode close, watching Howland Reed's back, remembering all that man had seen and never spoken of. She wondered what truths the neck kept, and what it might demand in return for passage. Ahead, the mist thickened, and somewhere beyond it, Moat Cailin waited, stone and ruin and iron-born arrogance, guarding the North's throat like a clenched hand. Robb Stark's fingers tightened on his reins. "We take it," he murmured. Gray wind moved forward, silent, and the swamp swallowed the sound of men following their king into the place where maps became lies. They did not light fires in the neck. Smoke would carry, and the Ironborn at Moat Cailin watched roads and rivers with the paranoia of men who feared being hunted. The crannogmen moved in darkness as easily as others moved in daylight, and they taught Robb Stark's men to do the same, though the Northmen grumbled and stumbled and cursed under their breath when water sucked at their boots. The camp was nothing more than a cluster of bodies huddled on higher ground, cloaks damp, breath steaming white. Catelyn Stark sat with her back against a tree trunk, pulling her cloak tight around her shoulders, listening to the swamp's constant whisper. Water dripped, frogs croaked. Somewhere in the mist, something moved with a splash that might have been a fish or something else. Robb Stark crouched beside Howland Reed over a rough sketch drawn on wet wood with charcoal. Moat Cailin's towers were marked with 3 black smudges, and the causeway was a thin line between swamps like a blade's edge. "The Iron Men watch the road," Howland Reed said softly. "They watch the causeway. They watch the river approaches. They don't watch the bog. They think the bog is death. They think it protects them." Mira Reed's knife rasped against a stone as she sharpened it, the sound quiet but relentless. "It does protect them," she said. "From armies." "Not from us," Howland Reed replied. Robb Stark's eyes followed the charcoal lines. "How many?" he asked. "Not many," Howland Reed said, "but enough. And they have the towers. And they have archers." Jojen Reed spoke without looking up, his voice a murmur. "And they are afraid," he said. "They have been afraid for days, and they don't know why." Catelyn Stark's gaze flicked to the boy. "Because they are about to die," she said, harsher than she intended. Jojen Reed's eyes lifted, distant. "Because the swamp is watching them," he said softly. Mira Reed rolled her eyes. "Ignore him," she said to Robb Stark. "He likes to speak like an old man in a boy's mouth." Howland Reed did not smile. "He sees things," Howland Reed said simply.
Robb Stark's jaw tightened.
"I only need him to see a way in," Robb Stark said. Howland Reed tapped the sketch. "There," he whispered, "a fallen section of stone behind the East Tower. The Iron Men do not patrol it because they cannot imagine anyone crossing that water."
Robb Starks Gase narrowed.
"We cross," he said. "Crannogmen first," Howland Reed said. "We silence sentries. Then your men move in." "The great John Umber will hate this," Robb Stark murmured. "He can hate it after the towers are ours," Mira Reed said briskly. Catelyn Stark watched Robb Stark's face as he stared at the sketch. He looked like Eddard Stark in that moment. Focused, grim, willing to do what was necessary without boasting of it. It made her chest ache with a strange mix of pride and dread. Gray wind stood at the edge of their small circle, ears pricked, nose to the wind. The direwolf's body was tense, ready. He did not like the swamp, but he understood hunting in darkness. "Howland Reed," Robb Stark said quietly. "If we take Moat Cailin, the north opens. Ramsay Snow will hear. The Ironborn will hear. Tywin Lannister will hear." Howland Reed's gaze was steady. "Then take it quickly," he said, "and move faster than their fear." Robb Stark nodded once. He looked toward the mist where Moat Cailin's shadow waited beyond sight, a black shape in a gray world. No fires burned, but the air felt charged, as if every reed and pool held its breath. Robb Stark rose, drawing his cloak tighter. "Wake the men," he said. Mira Reed slid her knife into its sheath. Jojen Reed stared into the dark water as if he could see a reflection that did not belong to him. Catelyn Stark pulled her cloak close and whispered a prayer that felt useless, because she had nothing else to offer the night. Grey Wind let out a low sound, anticipation, warning, promise, and padded forward into the mist, leading them toward the towers that guarded the North's throat. Moat Cailin smelled of rot and old blood. Even from the swamp, Catelyn Stark could feel the place's hatred, a ruin that remembered every army that had died trying to pass. The towers loomed like broken teeth in the mist, black stone rising from mud and water. The causeway lay narrow and slick, a strip of earth that funneled men into death. The Ironborn had made a fortress out of ruin. Torches flickered along parapets. Shapes moved behind broken battlements. The occasional laugh carried thinly, sharp and careless, the laughter of men who believed themselves untouchable. Crannogmen slipped into the water without splashing. They moved like part of the swamp itself, their cloaks blending with reeds. Mira Reed went with them, spear left behind, knife in hand. Her face held no fear, only focus, as if she had been born for this kind of killing. Robb Stark waited on firmer ground with his Northmen and river men, crouched low, breath slow. The great John Umber was beside him, jaw clenched so hard Catelyn Stark thought his teeth might crack. The great John's hands flexed on his axe handle, wanting battle he could see and shout at. "Quiet," Robb Stark murmured, and the great John's nostrils flared with frustration, but he obeyed. Catelyn Stark kept close behind Robb, heart hammering. She could not see much, only fog, water, the dark outline of stone. Yet she could imagine every arrow, every slip, every scream muffled by mist. A shadow moved on the east tower's broken ledge, an iron-born sentry, leaning out, bored. Mira Reed's hand appeared from below, swift as a striking snake. Her knife flashed once. The sentry's throat opened, and his body sagged without a cry, dragged down into the fog. A soft signal, a bird call that was not a bird. The crannogmen had taken the first mouth of the beast.
Robb Stark's hand lifted.
"Now," he whispered. Northmen surged forward, not roaring, but moving with brutal speed. They rushed the narrow approach that Howland Reed had indicated, hugging the swamp edge where footing held just enough. Mud sucked at boots. Water splashed as men slipped and caught themselves with curses bitten back. The Ironborn noticed too late. A horn sounded from within the ruin, one harsh blast. Torches flared. Shouts rose, startled and angry. Arrows hissed into the fog, black streaks that vanished until they struck flesh or wood with dull thuds. A Northman beside Catelyn Stark jerked as an arrow buried in his shoulder. He bit back a scream, teeth bared, and kept moving, driven by momentum and fear. The great John Umber broke into a snarl, the urge to bellow tearing at him. Robb Stark grabbed his arm once, hard. "Hold," Robb Stark hissed, and the great John Umber forced himself forward without shouting. His anger poured into speed. Grey wind shot through the fog like a launched spear. The dire wolf leapt onto an iron-born guard who had rushed down a broken stair, teeth sinking into the man's throat. The Ironborn's axe fell uselessly into mud as he gurgled, eyes wide. Grey wind shook once, and the man's body went limp. Mira Reed appeared again, hauling herself onto stone, hair wet, eyes fierce. She waved sharply, signaling that a section of the East Tower's base was clear. Robb Stark climbed, fingers gripping slick stone. He hauled himself up with the strength of a man who had learned that kings bled like anyone else. At the top, he found an iron-born reaver rushing him, axe raised. Robb Stark's sword met the axe with a jolt that rang through his arms. He shoved, then drove his blade in under the reaver's ribs. The Ironborn's breath left him in a wet gasp. Robb Stark kicked him away and moved on. The fight became chaos in tight spaces. Broken stairs, narrow ledges, mud-slick stone. Men slipped and fell and were trampled. Arrows struck bodies at close range. Steel flashed in torchlight, and fog swallowed screams. Howland Reed's crannogmen moved like knives, striking and vanishing, leaving Ironborn dead before they could raise a proper defense. The Iron Men fought hard when cornered, snarling curses to their drowned god. But the ruin betrayed them as much as it protected them. Broken stone made poor cover when wolves came from behind. The great John Umber finally let loose, the sound tearing from him like a released storm. "For the north!" he roared, and the shout crashed through the fog, rallying men who needed something loud to cling to. Robb Stark did not shout. He simply drove forward, eyes locked on the heart of the ruin, the place where an Ironborn captain barked orders, trying to pull his men into a line. Robb reached him in a rush. Their blades met. The captain's face was bearded and fierce, eyes bright with saltwater arrogance. "You can't take this," he snarled. "This is Ironborn." Robb Stark's sword cut him off, slicing deep across the man's throat. The captain's words became a bubbling gasp, and he fell backward into mud, staring up as if confused that the world could turn so suddenly. The Ironborn line broke. Some tried to flee along the causeway, but arrows found them. Some dropped weapons and raised hands, but Northmen who had lost brothers to Ironborn raids showed little patience. Robb Stark forced himself to breathe through the blood and fog. He looked out from the tower's broken parapet and saw the causeway stretching south, emptying into the swamp. The north lay beyond, cold and waiting. Moat Cailin had been taken not by an army charging, but by silence and swamp and the kind of cunning that the neck taught its children. Catelyn Stark climbed up after, breath ragged, cloak soaked. She looked at Robb and saw mud and blood streaked across his face, eyes burning with relentless will. "You did it," she whispered, half awe, half dread. Robb Stark stared north. "We opened the throat," he said. "Now we run before it closes again." Sunrise in the neck was not golden. It was pale, thin, reluctant, light that seemed unsure whether it wanted to touch the world. From Moat Cailin's broken parapet, Robb Stark looked out at a land that had always been his by right and now felt like something that might be stolen if he blinked. The swamp spread behind them like a living thing, indifferent to victory. Ahead, the road into the north stretched hard and cold, bordered by trees that stood black against the white. Gray wind paced along the parapet, sniffing at the wind. The direwolf's fur was damp with mist, flecked with blood. His eyes were bright and intent, fixed on the horizon. Howland Reed stood beside Robb, calm as deep water. Mira Reed leaned against stone, cleaning her knife with a strip of cloth, her hands steady. Jojen Reed stared into the distance with that unsettling quiet, as if he could see smoke before it rose. Catelyn Stark watched Robb, watching the north, and felt a hollow fear in her chest. Taking Moat Cailin had been necessary. It had also been a shout into the realm. The Wolf King still moved, still bit, still refused to die. A raven landed on the parapet, claws scraping stone. It shook its wings, scattering frost. A message tube was tied to its leg, sealed with a crest Catelyn Stark recognized even before Robb broke it: White Harbor's merman. Robb Stark's fingers tightened as he broke the seal. He read quickly, eyes narrowing, then widening with a flash of grim satisfaction, and then tightening again with something darker. "What?" Catelyn Stark asked, voice tight. Robb Stark handed her the parchment. The words were hurried, the ink smeared as if written in cold and haste. Wyman Manderly pledged ships and men if Robb could reach the White Knife. But the message also carried warning. Ironborn raiders had struck along the coast again, and in the chaos, a new name was being spoken in the north with fear and hatred: Ramsay Snow. "He's moving," Robb Stark murmured, voice low. "He's taking men. He's taking castles in the cracks left by Roose Bolton's death." The great John Umber's face twisted with fury. "Let me rip him apart," he growled. "Let me hang his flayed man from his own walls." Robb Stark did not answer at once. He looked out over the north as if trying to see through miles of cold and trees and smoke. In the distance, faint and thin, a darker smudge rose. a line of smoke on the horizon, too far to smell, too clear to ignore. Jojen Reed spoke softly. "There," he said, pointing. "The north burns. Not everywhere, not yet, but it will spread if you do not move like a wolf." Catelyn Stark's hands trembled slightly around the parchment. "White Harbor can carry you," she said. "Ships can move men faster than winter roads." Robb Stark nodded once. "We go," he said, and the word carried no hesitation. He turned to Howland Reed. "Your people saved us," he said. "I will not forget." Howland Reed's gaze held his. "Do not forget the swamp," Howland Reed said. "It watches, it remembers, and it will swallow any man who thinks himself too big."
Robb Stark's mouth tightened.
"I have learned," he said. Grey Wind stopped pacing and lifted his head. Ears pricked. The direwolf's gaze fixed on the distant smoke, and a low rumble built in his chest, warning, hunger, purpose. Robb Stark looked at his men gathering below, at the ruined towers behind them, at the opened road ahead. "We don't stop," he said. "Not for names, not for whispers, not for curses spoken by Septons who never held a blade." He glanced at Catelyn Stark, and for a heartbeat she saw the boy again, the one who had once asked her what honor meant. Then the king returned, hardened by halls of blood and swamps of silence. "North," Robb Stark said, and they went, leaving Moat Cailin behind like a broken tooth pulled from the throat of the realm, racing the winter and the lions and the new monsters that grew in the gaps left by dead men's schemes. Leaving Moat Cailin felt like pulling a thorn from flesh, relief first, then the sting of everything that had been held back. The ruins sank behind them into gray mist and wet reeds, its broken towers already swallowing the echoes of battle, as if the neck refused to admit that men could change its old stories. The road north was hard with frost, rutted where carts had once grown through mud, now a pale ribbon between dark trees. Snow lay in thin crusts that crunched under hooves and boots, and every breath rose white, as if even words turned to fog before they could become promises. Howland Reed did not come far. He walked with them to the first bend where the swamp ceded to firmer ground, where reeds gave way to pines and the air tasted less of rot. There he stopped, his crannogmen fanning out behind him like shadows that belonged to the earth.
Robb Stark drew rein.
Grey Wind paused at the head of the column, ears pricked, golden eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if he could smell the north's wounds from miles away. The great John Umber spat into the snow and muttered a curse that would have curdled milk, impatient to be away from water that tried to swallow men's feet. "Howland Reed," Robb Stark said. His voice carried no flourish, only the hard gratitude of a man who had survived because another chose loyalty over comfort. "I owe you Moat Cailin. I owe you the North's throat unbound." Howland Reed bowed his head slightly. "You owe the swamp," he said, as if that were the same thing. "And the swamp takes payment in time. Don't waste yours." Mira Reed stepped closer, her hair damp and dark against her cheeks, her knife already clean as if blood had never touched it. "The road is clearer once you reach the higher ground," she said. "But the snows deepen. Don't let your men sleep on the march. Winter eats the lazy." Jojen Reed watched Robb Stark with that unsettling stillness, eyes distant as if looking through him. "You will see smoke," Jojen Reed murmured, "and you will think it is too late. It won't be too late. Not yet." The great John Umber snorted. "Boy speaks in riddles," he growled. "Howland Reed's boy speaks in warnings," Catelyn Stark said, and her voice surprised even herself. The neck had always felt like a place where truth hid under water and waited. Perhaps the boy merely named what others refused to admit. Howland Reed's gaze shifted to her, something quiet passing behind his eyes. "Lady Catelyn Stark," he said. "Keep him from drowning in his own fire." Catelyn Stark's hands tightened on her reins. "If I knew how," she said softly, "I would."
Robb Stark's jaw flexed.
He looked at Howland Reed, at Mira Reed, at Jojen Reed, and Catelyn saw the weight of all the oaths piling on his shoulders. Oaths to the living, to the dead, to a North that did not know yet whether it was saved or merely delayed in its fall. "If the neck ever needs me," Robb Stark said, "call. I will come." Howland Reed's mouth twitched, almost pity. "The neck needs nothing," he replied. "It survives. Men are the ones who need saving." Grey Wind let out a low sound, impatient, insistent. Robb Stark took it as the only farewell he could afford. He nodded once to Howland Reed. Then he turned his horse north. The column moved. Boots found rhythm. The swamp vanished behind them, swallowed by mist, and with it went the last thin illusion of safety that Moat Cailin's fall had offered. The road ahead stretched into pine shadow and snowlight, and somewhere beyond those trees were burned villages, iron-born axes, and a bastard smile sharpening itself against the world. Caitlin Stark rode close enough to touch Robb Stark's sleeve if she leaned, close enough to feel the heat of him through layers of cloth and mail. She watched his face as he stared forward and wondered what part of him was still boy, what part was now only king, and what part was becoming something else entirely, something made of winter and necessity. They found Dacey Mormont where the road narrowed between pines and the snow lay deeper, drifted into smooth white banks that made the world look clean until you stepped close enough to see the soot smears and boot prints and the faint red flecks that told the truth. A horn sounded from ahead, short, urgent, and Robb Stark lifted his fist, halting the column with the ease of habit. Riders approached at speed, cloaks snapping, horses lathered. At their head was Dacey Mormont, her face wind-burned, her braids stiff with frost, her spear strapped across her back like a promise she had not yet kept. Her men looked worse. Eyes hollow, cheeks raw, one with his arm bound in blood-soaked cloth. They carried the stink of smoke with them and the sharp metal smell of fresh killing. Dacey pulled up hard and swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion, boots hitting packed snow. She did not bow like a courtier. She went to one knee like a soldier. "Your Grace," she said, breath steaming. "I caught you." Robb Stark dismounted as well, moving to her before she could kneel longer. "Rise," he said, and his hand closed around her forearm, hauling her up with a rough affection. "You should be in the Riverlands." "I was," Dacey Mormont said, her voice grim, "until I heard you were going north, until I saw what the lions were doing on the roads." Caitlin Stark felt her chest tighten. "What did you see?" she asked. Dacey's eyes flicked to Caitlin Stark, and there was respect there, and something like sorrow. "Villages burned for grain," Dacey Mormont said. "Messengers killed so no one hears your truth. Riders with lion cloaks moving like brigands. They want the Riverlands starving and afraid." Her jaw clenched. "I killed a pack near the Trident, saved some small folk, lost good men." Robb Stark's face hardened. "Tywin Lannister," he said softly, and the name sounded like a curse you could not wash off. Dacey nodded once. "Aye, he's not marching at you like a fool. He's bleeding everything around you so you're forced to choose what to abandon." The great John Umber barked a laugh that held no humor. "Let him bleed," he growled. "I'll bleed him back when we turn south." "Not yet," Robb Stark said, and his voice carried steel. He looked at Dacey Mormont. "You rode hard." "I rode like you were already dead if I didn't," she replied, blunt and honest enough to sting. Wyman Manderly edged his horse forward, cheeks flushed. "Lady Dacey Mormont," Wyman Manderly said, "White Harbor awaits. My Lord Father has raised ships." Dacey Mormont's gaze sharpened. "Ships?" she echoed. "Good. We'll need them."
Caitlin Stark, breath fogged.
"For what?" she asked, though she knew. She had felt the shape of it in Robb Stark's silence. Dacey Mormont looked north, past the pines, past the snow. "Iron-born," she said. "They've struck the coast again, and there are whispers of Ramsay Snow moving in the cracks left by Roose Bolton's death." Her mouth twisted. "A bastard taking a dead lord's skin and calling it a cloak." Robb Stark's hand tightened on his reins. "He will not," he said, voice low. Grey wind circled Dacey's riders, sniffing at their cloaks, their boots, the dried blood on their gloves. He paused at one man, head tilting, and a low growl rolled from his chest as if he tasted something wrong. "Fear. Yes, But not only fear. Something else. Something that had clung to those men like smoke. Dacey noticed. "He knows," she murmured, almost to herself. Robb Stark's eyes flicked to Grey Wind, then back to Dacey. "What else?" Robb asked. Dacey's mouth flattened. "There was a flayed man nailed to a tree near the King's Road," she said. "Fresh, not ironborn. Bolton work." Her gaze lifted. "Your Grace." Someone is claiming that fear again. Catelyn Stark felt her stomach hollow. Roose Bolton dead, yet Bolton cruelty still walking. It was like cutting off a snake's head and watching it bite anyway. Robb Stark mounted again. "Then we don't give them time," he said. "We go to White Harbor. We take ships, men, food. We move before winter seals the roads and before bastards turn fear into armies." Dacey Mormont swung back into her saddle. "Then let my riders take point," she said. "We know the smell of lions now." The column began to move again, heavier with dread, steadier with purpose. Snow creaked under hooves. The trees watched. Grey Wind trotted ahead, ears forward, as if the dire wolf carried all of them on an invisible leash toward whatever waited in the North's heart. The North greeted its king with ash. They reached the hamlet at the edge of a frozen stream near dusk, guided by smoke that had already turned thin and gray in the cold air. The houses were small, built of wood and stubbornness, their roofs sagging under snow. 2 had burned to black ribs. The beams collapsed inward like broken bones. The smell lingered anyway. Smoke, scorched grain, and the faint sweet rot of meat that should not have been left to cool outside. Robb Stark dismounted without a word. His men moved cautiously, scanning treelines, hands near weapons. The hamlet was quiet, too quiet. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a mouth that had screamed itself hoarse. Catelyn Stark stepped down from her saddle and felt the snow give under her boot, soft atop hard ground. Ash smeared her hem as she walked. Dacey Mormont moved beside her, face tight, spear in hand. The great John Umber stalked ahead like a man hunting something to kill, his breath coming out in angry bursts. They found survivors gathered near the stream, huddled around a pit where someone had tried to make a fire and failed. Women sat with blankets over their heads, rocking slightly. Children stared with eyes too old. Men stood rigid, faces gray, fists clenched as if they feared they might collapse if they unclenched. A man stepped forward when he saw Robb Stark. He was broad-shouldered, his beard frosted, his eyes red-rimmed. In his arms, he held a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. The bundle did not move. "Your Grace," the man whispered, and his voice broke. He sank to one knee in the snow, not out of ceremony, but because his legs gave out beneath him. "They came at dawn." Robb Stark moved closer, slowly, as if any sudden gesture might shatter what remained. "Who?" Robb asked. The man's eyes lifted, wild with grief. "Iron men," he said. "Or lions. I don't know. They wore no banners. They took our grain. They took our goats. His throat worked. "They took my boy." Catelyn Stark's breath caught. She looked at the bundle and saw a small hand, pale against gray cloth. Robb Stark's face went very still. "Show me," he said softly. The man pulled the blanket back with trembling fingers. The child's face was slack, lips blue, eyes half open as if surprised. A bruise darkened one cheek. There were marks on the neck that made Catelyn Stark's stomach twist. Fingers, perhaps, or rope. The great John Umber made a sound like an animal. "Cowards," he snarled. Wendell Manderly stepped forward, hands open, voice gentle as a big man trying not to be frightening. "We have bread," Wendell Manderly said. "We have salt pork. We have blankets. We can." The man's eyes snapped to Wendell Manderly with bitter suspicion. "Bread?" he hissed. "What good is bread when my boy is cold?" Wendell Manderly flinched, shame flooding his face. "None," he said quietly. "None. But it's what we can give now." Robb Stark knelt in the snow before the man and the dead child. He did not look away from the small face. "I'm sorry," Robb Stark said. and the words sounded like a blade scraped on stone. Honest, useless, heavy. The man's shoulders shook. They said the king was cursed, the man whispered. They said the seven would damn any man who fed wolves. They said they'd be forgiven if they turned on you. Catelyn Stark felt cold flood her veins. The faith, she murmured, tasting the bitterness.
Robb Stark's jaw tightened.
Did you see a lion on their coin? Robb asked, voice controlled. The man hesitated, then nodded once. Gold, he whispered. They dropped some in the mud, laughing, like it meant anything here. The great John Umber's axe hand flexed. I'll carve forgiveness into Tywin Lannister's ribs, he growled. Robb Stark rose slowly. He looked at the hamlet, at the burned homes, at the huddled survivors. His gaze moved like a man counting a debt. You will come with us, Robb Stark said. To White Harbor. You will have shelter. You will have food. And you will have men around you so no one comes again in the night. Some stared at him, startled by the offer. Others looked suspicious, as if expecting a trick. The North had been fed too many lies to trust easily. A woman spoke from beneath her blanket, voice thin. And if they come again? She asked. Robb Stark's eyes held hers. Then they die, he said, and the simplicity of it cut through the cold. Gray wind moved among them, sniffing at ash and broken doors. He paused at a charred post where a blackened seven-pointed star had been nailed, burned, defaced, turned into mockery. The direwolf's lip curled, and a low growl rolled out, vibrating through the hush. Catelyn Stark watched Robb Stark stare at that ruined symbol and understood the war's new shape. Tywin Lannister was not trying to beat Robb on a battlefield. He was trying to make the North believe its own king brought damnation, trying to turn hunger and grief into knives pointed inward. Robb Stark mounted again, and his voice carried across the hamlet like an oath. No god will save the men who do this, he said. Only we will. Snow fell thicker, soft and relentless, covering ashen white as if the world wanted to pretend it had not seen. White Harbor rose from the gray sea like a promise made in stone. Even in winter, it lived. The harbor was crowded with ships, long, sleek hulls and broad-bellied cogs, masts like a forest of bare branches stabbing at the low sky. Sailcloth hung stiff and pale, snapping in the wind. Dockworkers moved like ants despite the cold, hauling crates, shouting in thick northern accents, their breath steaming as they worked. Smoke rose from chimneys in thick curls, and the smell of salt and fish mixed with wood smoke and tar. Robb Stark's host approached along the road by the White Knife, and the city's gates opened wide, not grudgingly like the twins, but with the brisk competence of a place that understood trade and war both. Men lined the streets as the direwolf banners passed, some cheering, some staring in stunned silence, as if they had half believed the stories that Robb Stark was dead, or cursed, or both. Catelyn Stark felt eyes on her as well. She had been Lady of Winterfell, but here she was a wolf mother in a merman city, a figure in a story people whispered about. She kept her face calm, but inside she felt raw, scraped by the thought of how close she had come to dying under another roof, how fragile survival still was. At the docks, Wyman Manderly waited. He was enormous, wrapped in fur and rich cloth, his cheeks red from cold and perhaps from wine. His hands were ringed, his smile broad, his eyes bright. He looked like a man built for feasts and indulgence, but Catelyn Stark had learned to distrust appearances. The fat ones could be the sharpest. They had to be to survive in a world that underestimated them. Wendell Manderly rode forward, face shining with relief. "Father," he called, voice thick. Wyman Manderly opened his arms as if to embrace the whole harbor. "My son." He boomed. Then his gaze slid past Wendell Manderly and locked on Robb Stark. The smile remained, but something changed in it. Calculation, respect, the weight of a lord who knew what it meant to choose a side. "Your Grace," Wyman Manderly said, and he did bow then, deep enough that the movement looked painful for a man of his size. "White Harbor welcomes you, the North welcomes you, and my halls." His eyes glittered. are yours without songs you don't ask for." A ripple of grim laughter moved through the men behind Robb Stark. Even the great Jon Umber's mouth twitched. Robb Stark dismounted and stepped onto the pier. Grey Wind followed, head low, eyes scanning the crowd. The direwolf's presence made dockworkers step back instinctively, hands rising unconsciously as if to protect throats. A clerk holding a ledger dropped it, parchment fluttering. Wyman Manderly noticed, of course. He waved a thick hand. "Don't fret," he called to his people. "If the wolf bites, it's because you were foolish enough to smell like a fry." That earned more laughter, sharper this time, edged with the bitterness of what had nearly been. Catelyn Stark watched Wyman Manderly smile and saw beneath it. He was not merely welcoming a king. He was making a public vow, one no raven's whisper could twist easily. In a city of merchants and witnesses, public vows had weight. Robb Stark's gaze moved over the ships, the crowded docks, the armed men in Manderly colors posted with calm readiness. "You have been busy," Robb Stark said. Wyman Manderly's grin widened. "A lord must stay busy in winter," he replied. "If he sits, he freezes. Come, you'll want warmth, and you'll want to speak of ugly things without half the harbor listening." Dacey Mormont lingered near the edge of the pier, eyes sharp, watching faces. She leaned slightly toward Catelyn Stark. "Too many eyes," she murmured. "Too many lies," Catelyn Stark murmured back. Grey Wind's lip curled at a group of men whispering near a stack of crates. The men fell silent, pale, and backed away. Robb Stark watched them, then looked at Wyman Manderly. "The whispers reached here," Robb Stark said. Wyman Manderly's eyes remained bright, but the smile thinned. He said, "they reached here, so I built ships." He turned and gestured, and his men moved to escort them. Not as prisoners, but as honored guests under guard, the kind of honor that understood daggers still existed. As they walked, Catelyn Stark heard murmurs in the crowd. Cursed, Oathbreaker, Wolf King, alive. But she also heard something else, relief, hope, a hunger not for bread, but for leadership that did not fold when songs began. White Harbor's bells rang once, deep and steady, and Catelyn Stark felt, for the first time in days, the faintest warmth of possibility under her ribs. Wyman Manderly's hall was warm in a way Winterfell's had never been, not because it was kinder, but because White Harbor fought the cold with fire and wealth and stubborn practicality. Braziers burned along the walls. Tapestries hung thick, showing mermen and ships and the white knife's curve. The air smelled of roasted fish, spiced wine, and pine resin from fresh logs thrown onto the hearth. Yet the table set before Robb Stark was not a feast. It was a warboard. Maps lay spread. Roads, rivers, the coast, the islands where ironborn ships hid like sharks. Sea charts were weighed down by cups and daggers so the drafts could not steal them. A bowl of gold coins sat among the parchment like a pile of teeth. Some bore lions, some bore other faces. All looked the same in candlelight. Bribes. A man knelt at the far end of the table under guard, his hands bound. He wore fine cloth under travel grime, and his hair was cut in a southern fashion. His eyes flicked around the hall, quick and frightened. "A gift," Wyman Manderly said cheerfully, as if presenting a fat capon. "From King's Landing. He arrived yesterday with sweet words and sour coin." The kneeling man swallowed. "My lord," he began, voice trembling. "Aye." Robb Stark's gaze fixed on him. The man fell silent like a child caught lying. Wyman Manderly's smile remained, but his eyes were hard. "He offered forgiveness," Wyman Manderly said. "Forgiveness for what? For keeping faith with House Stark? For honoring my late friend Eddard Stark." His voice turned mock sorrowful. "He said the faith would bless me if I turned my gates against you." The great Jon Umber laughed, and the sound was ugly. "Bless you with what?" he rumbled. "A lion's leash?" Wyman Manderly spread his hands. "Gold," he said. "Pardons, promises, and a warning, of course." He nodded toward the emissary. "Tell them." The emissary licked his lips. Lord Tywin Lannister, he said quickly, offers peace. If you renounce Robb Stark, if you close your harbor to... Grey Wind's head lifted, and a low growl rolled out. The emissary flinched, eyes darting to the direwolf. Robb Stark's voice was quiet. "Keep speaking," he said, and the calm in it was more frightening than a shout. The emissary's throat bobbed. "If you renounce him," he continued, faster now, "the crown will recognize your rights. The most devout will grant absolution. Your ships will be permitted to trade freely. If you do not, you will be named harborer of an oathbreaker. And the crown," he swallowed, "will consider you an enemy." Catelyn Stark watched Wyman Manderly's expression shift slightly, the humor sliding away like a mask. Behind the fat lord's eyes lived old grief and older rage, sharpened by the memory of Eddard Stark's death. Wendell Manderly's hands clenched on the table. "My lord father," he said, voice thick, "don't listen to..." Wyman Manderly waved him down gently. "I'm listening," he said, and the softness in his tone was almost cruel. He turned to Robb Stark. "Your Grace," he said, "I have listened. Now I have decided." He leaned forward, his bulk creaking the chair, and looked at the emissary. "Tell your lion," Wyman Manderly said, voice suddenly cold, "that White Harbor does not trade honor for pardon. We do not beg absolution from Septons who read whatever scroll gold buys. We are Northmen, even if we smell of fish." The emissary's face went white. "My lord," Wyman Manderly lifted a hand, and guards hauled the emissary to his feet. "He will be kept," Wyman Manderly said, almost pleasant again. "Not harmed. Not yet. I want him alive long enough to carry a message back, if we choose to send him." Robb Stark watched Wyman Manderly for a long moment. "You risk much," Robb Stark said. Wyman Manderly's eyes glittered. "I have already lost much," he replied. "And I have ships." He gestured, and one of his men unrolled another chart. Ironborn positions marked in ink, raids circled in red. "We can strike the Ironmen's supply lines. We can move men along the coast faster than winter roads allow. We can land where they don't expect." Dacey Mormont leaned in, eyes sharp. "Deepwood Moat," she said. "Bear Island. The stony shore. They bleed us there." Wyman Manderly nodded. "Aye, and we can bleed them back." He looked to Robb Stark. "But you will need more than ships," he added. "You will need the North's heart. You will need Winterfell." The word hung in the warm hall like frost. Catelyn Stark saw Robb Stark's face tighten. Winterfell, burned, taken, emptied of his brothers. The wound that never stopped aching. "I know," Robb Stark said softly. Wyman Manderly leaned back. "Then eat," he said, and gestured at the dishes brought in: warm broth, bread, fish. "Eat because winter will not care if you are king or corpse. Eat because the road to Winterfell is long, and bastards are quicker than we like." Grey Wind's growl faded, but his eyes remained on the emissary as if memorizing his scent, in case the man ever returned in the dark with a knife. The Wolf's Den was older than Wyman Manderly's wealth. Black stone and narrow windows, built when kings still ruled the North and White Harbor's mermen were not yet settled fat and secure behind trade. The chamber Wyman brought them to had thick walls and a window that looked out over the harbor's frozen edges, where ice formed in jagged sheets near the pilings and broke apart with each tide like brittle bone. Catelyn Stark stood at that window, watching men move like dark dots across the docks, watching ships creak and settle. The sea looked like a living thing struggling under winter's grip. She understood it too well. She had watched her family struggle the same way, each tide pulling, each crack widening. Behind her, Wyman Manderly's voice dropped low, no longer booming. "There are other letters," he said. "Not only Tywin Lannister's coin." Wendell Manderly held one now, sealed with the merman crest. His hands trembled slightly. "From a merchant," Wendell Manderly said. "From King's Landing, he claims. A man who trades wool and hides. He swears he saw." Robb Stark lifted a hand. "Read," he said. Wendell Manderly broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His eyes moved, then widened, then tightened with pain. He swallowed and read aloud. The letter spoke of the Great September, of Sansa Stark kneeling before an altar while a proclamation was read, naming Robb Oathbreaker and cursed. It spoke of the crowd's jeers. It spoke of Cersei Lannister's smile. It spoke of Tywin Lannister watching like a man counting coins. Catelyn Stark's breath caught, sharp and hot, like she had swallowed embers. She turned from the window slowly. "My daughter," she whispered, and the words felt like a wound reopened. Robb Stark's face went very still. Only his eyes moved, darkening. Grey Wind, sensing the shift, pressed his head harder against Robb Stark's boot, a heavy, grounding weight. "They use her like a banner," Dacey Mormont said from the shadow, voice low and furious. "A banner they can stab you with." Wyman Manderly's eyes held no humor now. "They want you to turn south," he said. "They want you chasing your sister while winter and iron men and bastards eat your home."
Robb Stark, jaw flexed.
"I won't," he said, but the word sounded like it cost him. Catelyn Stark stepped closer, hands trembling. "Robb," she said softly. "She's alone." Robb Stark's gaze flicked to her. There was grief there, yes, and helpless anger, and something else, shame, perhaps, that he could not be the brother Sansa Stark needed and the king the North demanded at the same time. "I know," Robb Stark said, voice rough. "I know, and I hate it." Wyman Manderly leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "Your Grace," he said, "I have men in King's Landing, merchants, sailors, men who hear whispers in taverns and docks. They cannot pull your sister from the Red Keep, but they can watch, they can send word. And if a chance ever comes, if she is moved, if she is sent north as a hostage, then we can reach." Catelyn Stark clung to that like a splinter of wood in deep water. "Promise me," she whispered, not to Wyman Manderly, but to the room, to the gods, to anyone listening. Robb Stark's hand clenched once, then relaxed on the table's edge. "I promise," he said, "not that I will save her tomorrow, but that I will not forget her. Not ever." Catelyn Stark nodded, because it was all she could take without breaking. Wendell Manderly shifted. "There's more," he said, voice strained. He unfolded another scrap of parchment tied to the first. "They speak of a bastard in the north. They say he flays men who won't bend. They say he wears Bolton pink and calls himself Lord now that Roose Bolton is dead." Ramsay Snow's shadow slid into the room, though the man himself was miles away. Dacey Mormont's eyes narrowed. "He's gathering," she said. "He'll take what he can before you reach him." Robb Stark turned back to the harbor window, but he did not look at ships now. He looked through them, toward snow-covered forests and burned towers. "Then we move," Robb Stark said. "We move before fear becomes his army." Wyman Manderly nodded once. "My ships can sail within 3 days," he said. "Weather willing. They can carry men to the stony shore, to Bear Island, to Deepwood Moat. They can harry iron-borne longships. While you march inland, the sea will bite."
Robb Stark's mouth tightened.
"And you?" he asked Wyman Manderly. Wyman Manderly's eyes glittered with something dangerous. "I will hold White Harbor," he said, "and I will hold the knife at your back, your grace. If any lord turns, if any whisper becomes a dagger, I will hear it first." Catelyn Stark watched the fat lord and saw, beneath silken flesh, a loyal man with teeth. Grey Wind lifted his head and let out a low sound. Approval, impatience, hunger. Robb Stark rested his hand on the direwolf's skull, fingers sinking into fur. "Winterfell," Robb Stark murmured, and the name sounded like both prayer and vow. Ramsay Snow laughed when the raven arrived. It was not a joyful sound. It was sharp, brittle, like ice cracking under weight. The Dreadfort's hall was colder than White Harbor's richest chamber. Not for lack of fire, but for lack of warmth in the stone itself. The walls seemed to drink heat and give nothing back. Torches burned with a thin, wavering light that made the flayed man banner look like living skin. The maester stood trembling in the center of the hall, the raven's message clutched in his hands as if parchment could bite. "My lord," he said, voice thin. Moat Cailin is fallen. Ramsay Snow finished, and his smile widened. He stood near the dais with a knife in hand, idly scraping at a strip of something on the blade. Meat, perhaps, or old blood. His hair was unkempt, his cheeks hollow, his eyes bright with hungry amusement. He looked like a man carved out of spite. At his feet knelt Theon Greyjoy, shackled, filthy, eyes dull. Once he had been proud. Once he had worn fine clothes and called himself prince. Now he flinched at every shift of Ramsay Snow's weight, like a dog trained by kicks. A wolf king who refuses to die, Ramsay Snow murmured, tasting the words. How rude, the maester swallowed. It says Robb Stark has taken the causeway, the maester whispered. It says he is in White Harbor. It says Wyman Manderly has. Ramsay Snow's knife stopped scraping. For a heartbeat the hall felt still, like prey holding its breath. Then Ramsay Snow's smile returned, slower, more thoughtful. White Harbor, he said, as if savoring the sound. Ships, food, witnesses. His eyes flicked to the Bolton men standing along the walls, and those men shifted, uncomfortable, because even they did not like being the focus of that gaze. Do you know what that means? No one answered. No one wanted to speak in Ramsay Snow's presence unless commanded. It means the wolf is coming, Ramsay Snow said, voice almost cheerful. It means he thinks he can bite me. He looked down at Theon Greyjoy, and his eyes glittered. And it means I need a gift. Theon Greyjoy's mouth opened slightly, a soundless plea forming. Ramsay Snow crouched and grabbed a fistful of Theon Greyjoy's hair, yanking his head back so his face tilted to the torchlight. Theon Greyjoy's eyes were wide with terror. His lips cracked. What do wolves love? Ramsay Snow asked softly, as if speaking to a child. They love their den. They love their pack. They love the idea that home means safety. He let go of Theon Greyjoy abruptly, as if bored. He rose, turning to the men along the wall. Bring me hostages, Ramsay Snow ordered. Bring me men with names Northmen care about. Bring me any who hesitated when Roose Bolton lived and now pretend they were loyal all along. Bring me fear. A Bolton captain cleared his throat, voice cautious. My lord Roose Bolton is dead. The Dreadfort is mine, Ramsay Snow snapped, and the cheer vanished from his face, replaced by sudden violence. My father is dead. My father's title is a coat that fits me now. His smile returned, crueler. And if any man doubts it, I can show him how well my knives fit his skin. Silence slammed down again. Ramsay Snow turned back to the maester. Send ravens, he said, to the Riswells, to the Dustons, to every house that hates the Starks and fears them at the same time. Tell them Robb Stark broke guest right and killed his host. Tell them the faith names him cursed. Tell them a wolf king brings only ruin. The maester's hands shook. Yes, my lord, he whispered. Ramsay Snow's gaze slid to Theon Greyjoy. And you, he said gently, and that gentleness was the worst thing in the hall. You will help me write the ending. Theon Greyjoy tried to speak, but his throat only produced a rasp. Ramsay Snow leaned down, close enough that his breath warmed Theon Greyjoy's cheek. You took Winterfell once, Ramsay Snow whispered. You know the paths, the secret doors, the bones. You will tell me how to make it a trap again. Theon Greyjoy's eyes filled with tears he could not wipe away. Ramsay Snow straightened, knife flashing in torchlight. Let the wolf come, he said, and his smile widened until it looked almost like hunger. I'll show him a homecoming. White Harbor built war the way other places built bread. In the shipyard, the air rang with hammers and saws. Men hauled timbers slick with frost, their shoulders hunched against the wind. Sawdust mixed with snow in pale drifts that clung to boots and cloaks. Ships took shape under gray sky, keels laid, ribs rising, planks hammered into place with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. Robb Stark walked among them with Wyman Manderly, Wendell Manderly trailing close like a shadow eager to prove itself. Robb Stark's gaze moved over the ships the way it had once moved over battle lines, counting, measuring, imagining how they would cut through water, how they would carry men, how they would burn if iron-born fire found them first. "These are for the stony shore," Wyman Manderly said, pointing with a thick finger toward a smaller, faster hull. "Shallow draft, quick, good for slipping into coves and out again." "And those?" Robb Stark asked, nodding toward broader ships. "Men," Wyman Manderly said simply, "and food, and horses if we lash them properly." He grunted, amused. "Horses hate ships, but hunger hates them more." Dacey Mormont stood near stacks of crates, prying one open with the tip of her spear. Inside were axes, spearheads, bundles of arrow shafts. She nodded once, satisfied. "Enough to arm a village," she murmured. "A village will need arming," Robb Stark said quietly. Catelyn Stark watched from a platform near the yard's edge, arms folded against the cold. She saw her son in this place of merman and salt, and she saw how he fitted even here, how war made any ground his own, how necessity stripped away the comfort of unfamiliarity. She hated that part of her, admired it. The great John Umber argued with a shipwright near a half-built hull, his voice booming. "You call this a ship?" he thundered. "It looks like a tub a fat lord bathes in." The shipwright, a lean man with tar-stained hands, glared back. "It'll carry twice your weight and still float," he snapped, "which is more than can be said for your tongue." The great John Umber roared laughter, and the shipwright rolled his eyes and went back to hammering. The argument resolved in the northern way, by insult and persistence. Robb Stark's mouth twitched briefly, then sobered. "How many men can you spare?" Robb asked Wyman Manderly. Wyman Manderly's eyes remained bright, but his tone turned careful. "Enough to strike Iron Men," he said. "Not enough to empty White Harbor. If I strip my walls, lions will smell it."
Robb Stark nodded.
"You hold the harbor," he said. "You hold the ships. You hold the sea's bite. I will take men inland. I will take Winterfell back, if it can still be taken." Catelyn Stark's breath caught at the name. Winterfell. She remembered its smell, wood smoke, hot bread, the godswood's damp earth. She remembered Bran's laughter, Rickon's small fists, the way Robb Stark had once run across its yard with snow on his hair. Now the name sounded like a ruin. Wendell Manderly stepped closer. "White Knife can carry you upriver partway," he said, "if you want to move faster than roads." Robb Stark considered, eyes narrowing. "We'll move by river until ice stops us," he decided. "Then we march." Gray wind prowled through the shipyard, nose to the ground, sniffing at sawdust, at the salt-scented ropes, at strangers' boots. Men stepped back instinctively, but the dire wolf did not threaten them. He merely searched, as if expecting a knife to crouch behind every crate. Catelyn Stark watched him and felt the truth settle. Gray Wind was not only a beast. He was the shape of Robb Stark's instincts given teeth. And those instincts had been right at the twins. They would need to be right again. A messenger came running through the yard, cheeks red, breath steaming. He thrust out a parchment sealed with a crude smear of wax. Robb Stark broke it open, read, and his face went very still. "What?" Catelyn Stark asked, stepping down from the platform, heart tightening. Robb Stark held the letter out. "A flayed man was found near the road to Barrowton," he said, voice low. "And the message nailed to him," his mouth tightened. "It says, 'The king is cursed. Turn back.'" Dacey Mormont's eyes went cold. "Ramsay Snow," she said softly, as if tasting poison. Robb Stark folded the letter with deliberate care. "No," he said. "It says, 'He knows I'm coming.'" Gray Wind growled, low and eager, and Robb Stark's hand went to the direwolf's head, steadying both of them. "Then we go anyway," Robb Stark said, and his voice carried into the shipyard like a hammer strike. "We go before fear spreads any farther than it already has." They left White Harbor before the third dawn, because Winter did not care for councils and maps. Cared only for time, and time was the one thing Robb Stark could not afford to waste. The column moved out under a sky the color of iron. Supply sleds creaked behind oxen. Men wrapped scarves over mouths, eyes narrowed against wind. The direwolf banner snapped above them, dark against white fields, a mark that drew both hope and hatred wherever it passed. Catelyn Stark rode close, her cloak heavy, her hands numb on the reins. She watched the men's faces, harder now, more hollow. They had seen burned hamlets and dead children. They had heard Septons declare curses. They had begun to understand that this war was not only steel. It was story, and story could make a starving man pick up a knife. Dacey Mormont rode near the front, her gaze scanning treelines. The great John Umber rode on the other side, axe strapped across his back, his breath coming out in angry clouds. Wyman Manderly stayed near the supply sleds, barking orders, trying to keep men fed and moving, his merman pride sharp in his voice. Gray wind ran ahead, silent over snow, the direwolf's paws barely leaving prints. He paused often, nose to the wind, then moved on, always drawing them forward like a hunter leading a pack. They passed a tree near the road where bark had been carved away. A flayed man symbol stared out, raw and fresh, the cuts oozing sap that froze into amber tears. Someone had tied a strip of pink cloth to a branch, and it fluttered weakly in the wind like a sick joke. The great John Umber reached up and ripped the cloth down with a snarl. "Bastard," he growled. Robb Stark did not stop. He looked at the carved symbol and felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Roose Bolton dead, yet Bolton fear still walking. Ramsay Snow was not simply a threat of men and knives. He was a threat of what the North might become if terror filled the spaces where loyalty used to live. A rider came from behind, galloping hard along the road's edge. He pulled up near Robb Stark, breath ragged. "Your Grace," he said, voice hoarse. "A raven from Riverrun." Robb Stark took the message tube and broke the seal. Catelyn Stark watched his eyes move, watched them tighten. "Tywin Lannister has offered pardons to Riverlords who renounce me," Robb Stark said quietly, "and the faith has named me cursed in King's Landing." He folded the parchment. "Brynden Tully says some men hesitate." Catelyn Stark felt the old panic rise. "And Riverrun?" she asked. "Riverrun holds," Robb Stark said. "For now. Brynden Tully will hold until his arms break." His gaze went distant for a moment, as if seeing his uncle's hard face in flame-lit halls. Dacey Mormont's voice cut in. "Then we make it worth it," she said. "We take the North back fast. We give the realm a truth it can't ignore." The great John Umber grunted. "Aye, victory makes a fine song."
Robb Stark's mouth tightened.
"Songs," he murmured, and the word tasted bitter. "Songs got men killed." Gray wind halted ahead, head lifted, ears forward. The direwolf's body stiffened, and a low growl rolled back toward the column. Robb Stark raised his fist. The column slowed. "What is it?" Catelyn Stark whispered, heart tightening. Robb Stark's eyes narrowed, scanning the treeline. "Something's wrong," he said. Snow fell softly, covering prints, hiding truths. The trees stood still, dark, watching. Robb Stark drew his sword slowly, the sound of steel leaving scabbard crisp in the cold air. Around him, men's hands moved to weapons, breath held. "Forward," Robb Stark said softly, "but ready." And the North's winter road carried them onward, past carved threats and silent warnings, toward the place where Ramsay Snow waited with his own idea of homecoming. The ambush came like winter itself, quiet until it was everywhere. They entered a stretch where the road dipped between trees. The snow churned by old traffic into hard ridges that made horses stumble if they were careless. The light had begun to fade, turning the world blue-gray. Breath steamed. The wind sharpened. Gray wind stopped again. A few lengths ahead, body stiff. His ears flattened, then pricked. His nostrils flared. He did not growl this time. He went silent. Worse than growling, because silence meant certainty. Robb Stark raised his hand. "Hold," he murmured. Too late. A bolt hissed from the treeline and struck a Northman in the neck. The man went down without a sound, blood steaming on snow. Another bolt struck a horse. The beast screamed, reared, and threw its rider into the hard drifts. Bolton men burst from the trees in pink cloaks, their faces wrapped in cloth against cold and perhaps against shame. They moved fast, axes and short swords flashing. Some carried crossbows, firing at close range, then dropping weapons to rush in with blades. Shields! Wyman Manderly roared from near the supply sleds, his voice carrying panic and authority both. Robb Stark drove his horse forward, sword raised, cutting down the first attacker who came too close. Steel bit through fur and cloth, and the man fell with a wet grunt. Another lunged. Robb parried, then slammed his pommel into the attacker's face, cracking bone. The man dropped, clutching his nose, blood dark against snow. The great John Umber hit the Bolton line like a falling tree. His axe swung in a brutal arc, splitting a man from shoulder to chest. He bellowed, fury finally given release. "Bolton dogs!" he roared, and his voice shook the branches. Dacey Mormont fought with cold precision. She thrust her spear into a Bolton man's chest, felt ribs give, then yanked free and pivoted, driving the butt of the spear into another's knee. The man screamed and fell, and she finished him with a short, efficient stab that left no room for mercy. Catelyn Stark's horse danced, frightened by screaming and blood. She forced it steady, eyes wide. A boy, one of the younger riders, barely old enough to shave, fell from his saddle with an arrow in his thigh, crying out. Instinct overrode fear. Catelyn Stark leaned down, grabbed him by the collar, and hauled him behind her horse, using the animal's bulk as cover. The boy sobbed, teeth chattering, eyes huge. "Hold still," she hissed, tearing a strip of cloth and pressing it to the wound. Her hands were numb, but blood was warm, and she hated that warmth for existing at all. Gray wind became a gray blur. The direwolf sprang into the Bolton line, teeth flashing. He took a man by the forearm and ripped, the sound wet and awful. The man screamed, trying to pull away, but Grey Wind's jaws held like a trap. Another Bolton swung an axe at Grey Wind's back. Grey Wind twisted, the blade grazing fur, and lunged, clamping onto the man's throat. The scream died into gurgling. Robb Stark saw a crossbowman raising his weapon toward Catelyn Stark's position. Rage flared hot, sharp. He spurred forward, cutting through snow, and drove his sword into the crossbowman's belly before the bolt could loose. The man's eyes widened, shocked, and he collapsed, bolt clattering uselessly into snow. "Mother!" Robb Stark shouted, and the fear in the word cut through the battle like a spear. "I'm here!" Catelyn Stark shouted back, voice raw. She did not know if she was lying, because being here meant nothing if the next bolt found her throat. The Bolton line faltered as gray wine tore into them, and the great John Umber broke their center. Some tried to flee back into the trees. Robb Stark's men pursued, grim and ruthless. There was no patience left for mercy when the enemy wore your own land's colors and carried knives bought by fear. When it ended suddenly, like a storm exhausting itself. Bolton bodies lay scattered among churned snow. A few Northmen lay too, blood freezing black around them. The trees stood silent again, indifferent. Robb Stark dismounted, chest heaving, and knelt beside one of the fallen Bolton men. He yanked the cloth from the man's face. A northern face stared up, young, terrified, eyes glazing. Not a foreign invader, not an iron-born raider. One of theirs. Robb Stark's mouth tightened until it looked like pain. He closed the man's eyes with 2 fingers, then rose slowly. "This isn't Tywin Lannister's army," Robb Stark said, voice low. "This is Ramsay Snow's beginning." Dacey Mormont wiped her spear clean on a dead man's cloak, eyes hard. "He's testing you," she said, "testing how far fear reaches." The great John Umber spat blood and snow. "Let him test," he growled. "I'll answer." Grey Wind returned to Robb Stark's side, muzzle red, breath steaming. The direwolf pressed close, as if to make sure Robb Stark still stood. Robb Stark stared north into the deepening dusk, where the road disappeared into trees and snow and whatever waited beyond. "He wants me angry," Robb Stark murmured. "He wants me blind." Catelyn Stark, still kneeling beside the wounded boy, looked up at her son. "Then don't be," she said, voice shaking but fierce. "Be cold, be clear, be alive." Robb Stark's gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat the king and the son stood in the same eyes. Then the king hardened again. "Forward," Robb Stark said. "We keep moving, we take Winterfell back, and we end this bastard before the North forgets what it means to be Stark." Snow fell heavier, soft as lies, as the column reformed and pushed onward into the dark.